The 15th of December. When Joachim woke up on the 15th of December, there were only 10 doors left to open in the magic advent calendar. He didn't even have time to sit up in bed before Mama and Papa were in his room. Joachim was no longer cross because they had opened his secret box. They had done something they had no right to, but he had forgiven them. He couldn't have gone on sulking about it forever. Besides, it was more fun to read about Elizabeth and the pilgrimage where Mama and Papa were sharing it. It was almost like having a birthday every day until Christmas Eve. "Let's get going," said Papa. Joachim pulled himself up in bed and opened door number 15. He had to fish out the scrap of folded paper and be careful so that it didn't tear. The picture showed islands and skerries with houses on them. The small islands were bathed in radiant sunshine. That day, it was Papa's turn to read. He grabbed the piece of paper, cleared his throat twice, and read loudly and clearly from the fragile sheet. The 7th sheep. The pilgrims came to the Venetian lagoon at the top of the Adriatic Sea. They paused on a little rise with a view over the lagoon, and the Ferial started to point out all the islands and skerries that studded the water. On many of the islets, the Venetians had built houses, on some of them churches as well. Several of the islets were so close together that bridges had been built between them. Everywhere there were scores of small fishing boats. "The time is 797 years after Christ," announced the Ferial. "We see the young Venice, which will soon be the name of the 118 islands. The Venetians settled here in order to be protected from the sea pirates and barbarians who were roving about. Exactly 100 years ago, they all combined under a leader called the Doge." "I can't see any gondolas," complained Elizabeth. "I thought there would be more bridges too." The Ferial laughed. "But you're not in the Venice of the 20th century. I said the time was 797, and that people have lived here for only a couple of centuries. But Venice will soon become so thickly populated that one island will scarcely be separated from another." While they stood looking out over all the small islets and islands, a rowing boat came past. One end was filled with salt. In the other end stood some sheep, bleating at the sun which was about to break through the morning mist. The man who was rowing the boat was so frightened when he caught sight of the procession of pilgrims that he covered his eyes with his arm, took a step backwards, and lost his balance so that he fell head over heels into the water. Elizabeth saw him come to the surface a few seconds later, and then go under again. "He's drowning," she cried. "We must save him." But the angel Ferial was already on the way. He hovered gracefully above the glittering water, seized the man when he surfaced again, and lifted him up on land, dripping wet. The Ferial drew in the rowing boat. The man lay down on the ground and coughed fit to burst his lungs. He gasped for breath and said, "Grazie, grazie." Elizabeth tried to explain that they were on their way to Bethlehem to greet the Christ child, and that he needn't be frightened. Imperial had begun circling around him. "Fear not," he said in a voice as soft as silk, "and be in no wise afraid. But you should not have been all alone in the sea if you can't swim, for you can't always expect an angel to be around. We wander about only very rarely, you know." It didn't look as if Imperial's advice was any comfort to the man. But the cherub sat down beside him, patted him on the cheek, and went on repeating, "Fear not." It must have had an effect, for the man got to his feet and trudged back to his boat. He lifted the little lamb out of it and walked back towards them. "Agnus Dei," he said. That means God's lamb. And the lamb joined the rest of the flock of sheep without protest. Joshua struck his shepherd's crook on the ground and said, "To Bethlehem, to Bethlehem!" And they sprang off again. At the very end of the Venetian Gulf stood the old Roman town of Aquileia. As they ran, Ferial pointed to a monastery. The time is 718 years after Christ. But there have been Christian communities here from ancient times. The procession of pilgrims sped on through the town of Trieste. Then they continued south, across country, through Croatia. Papa put the scrap of paper down on the bed and opened one of the large atlases that he had placed on Joachim's desk. Here's Venice. Yes, and here's Trieste. That's on the border of Yugoslavia, Slovenia now. I can't find Aquileia, but maybe it doesn't exist anymore, said Mama. You must look in the historical atlas as well, which I haven't got. Papa fetched the other atlas. There were maps of all the countries in Europe, but the names of the countries and the towns were different from one map to the other. Find a map of the area for the 8th century, said Mama. Papa turned the pages of the atlas over and over. Here it is, Aquileia. The old town was situated halfway between Venice and Trieste. This is quite fantastic. What is? Asked Joachim. John must have used old maps like this too, for the world changes all the time. History is like a big pile of pancakes, where each pancake is a new map of the world. Pancakes? Said Joachim. Papa nodded. It's never enough to ask where something's happening, and it's not enough to ask when something's happening. You always have to ask both when and where. He put both hands on top of Joachim's hands. Imagine that you have 20 pancakes piled on top of each other. If there's a black speck on one of the pancakes, and you have to find that particular speck, you must find out which of the 20 pancakes the black speck is on, and exactly where on the pancake. You may have to leaf through the whole pile. Joachim nodded, and Papa went on. The long journey to Bethlehem is all about a journey that goes right through all 20 pancakes. Elizabeth doesn't travel just on the top pancake. She's moving through the whole mountain of them. Now Joachim understood what Papa meant. They're travelling down through 20 centuries, said Papa. There are maps in this book that show how the world looked in every one of the 20 centuries. I think John must have been reading a pancake book like this. Papa and Joachim couldn't help laughing when Papa said pancake book. The big question is whether there really was a man who was saved by an angel in Venice in the year 797. Do you believe it's possible to find out? Said Mama. Surely you don't think all this story is true? Said Papa. No, I suppose not, said Mama, wavering. But if it really had happened, the man would be bound to have talked about it. To the priest, for instance. Then it might have been written about in books. Maybe we ought to search in the library shelves. Papa didn't want to hear any more. Instead he said, Let's go and have a pizza in town, and go to the market afterwards. You remember what he looks like, Joachim? Of course, said Joachim. I'd know him at once. He talked a bit oddly, but then he may not be Norwegian. That day, Mama met Joachim at school, and they took the bus to town to meet Papa. From the pizza restaurant, they could look down on the market in front of the cathedral. As they ate, Papa kept asking, Can you see him, Joachim? Every time Joachim had to answer no. John wasn't at the market selling flowers anymore. They bought some chunky candles and a couple of Christmas presents, then went into the bookshop where Joachim had found the magic advent calendar. The bookseller recognised Papa and Joachim at once, and shook Mama's hand too. Here we are again, said Papa. We wondered whether you had seen anything of this remarkable flower seller. The bookseller shook his head. Oh, it's quite a while since he was here. He's not usually around much at this time of year. The magic advent calendar is a bit of a mystery, explained Mama. We wanted to invite him home to us to thank him for it properly. They agreed that the bookseller should ask John to phone them. Just one more thing, said Papa as they were leaving. Do you know what country he comes from? I think he said he was born in Damascus, said the bookseller. When they were in the car going home, Papa sat drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. If only we had found that man, he said. At least he found out where he comes from, replied Mama. Isn't Damascus the capital of Syria? See you tomorrow.